Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 448. Friday, June the 1st, 2018. Thank you so much for tuning in. Alrighty, let's get to it. Let's see here. You know, we've talked before about this first meeting where Carter Page was first approached by Mr. Halper. And there's a very good article by Sebastian Gorka where he does some research into this particular event, who was there, and what was going on. We've talked about it and covered it in various bits and pieces, but I just wanted to focus on it for just a minute because there's a person who attended that meeting that I hadn't heard about yet, or that symposium, that function, whatever you want to call it, at Cambridge University in London. So I want to go through this just for a second and just give you the facts. This function took place in London at Cambridge. It was some kind of a symposium. It was July the 11th and the 12th of 2016. The topic was the 2016 race to change the world. Now, to me that doesn't mean anything. To you it probably doesn't mean anything. But to someone like Sebastian Gorka, who does a lot of these functions, travels to a lot of these functions, has been at Cambridge for these symposiums before, says this would have been the type of function, this type of the name, this particular topic of the day, 2016 race to change the world. He said that's the type of thing that would be the type of thing that wouldn't interest any of those academics who would attend a function like that. And he lays out a few of the more interesting ones that would attract these type of people. He said it's almost like they came up with this purposely so that it wouldn't generate a lot of attention or bring a lot of people in. And I think that's a very interesting point for Mr. Gorka to make, and I wouldn't be able to evaluate that, but he certainly would. And it's just something to keep in the back of our mind, which shows us that this entire symposium may have been put on for the very sole purpose of setting the trap for Carter Page and any of the others who might have been in attendance here. So here's probably one of the more interesting details of this particular event that I wasn't aware of. Now, I've mentioned before that Madeleine Halfbright was one of the speakers, one of the featured speakers there, but also was Malcolm Rifkind and Richard Dearlove. So these are some pretty high-level people who are, you know, former high-level bureaucrats in the political and the intelligence realm. Madeleine Halfbright, Malcolm Rifkind, and Richard Dearlove. They were the speakers on that particular occasion. In attendance were Carter Page, and we've already established that, Steele Halper, because that's where Halper eventually got together with Carter Page, began to develop his relationship with him, which would lead him to Clovis, which would lead him to Papadopoulos. But I did not know this, but we just find out from Sebastian Gorka that Christopher Steele was also there. So this is our first time since I've been looking into this, trying to find this connection, that we finally see a positive connection of Christopher Steele to Steele Halper. So that's what's important to note about that. It's the first time that I've been able to, because I've known, certainly these two must have known each other. They run in the same circles, they know all the same people, they're involved with all the same people, but never have we seen anything that would conclusively tell us that yes, they must have known each other. Because I have my strange suspicions that Mr. Halper may just be one of those collectors, if not the primary collector for Christopher Steele. This certainly provides more evidence that my suspicions, and it's all I have right now is a suspicion, but it is my suspicion that Christopher Steele was, in a sense, working with Halper. Exactly how planned out or how coordinated or anything like that, I don't know. I'm just trying to tie the connection because I keep coming up with these disconnects as I try to put the pieces together, and I always seem to come up with a disconnect. Something is missing. There's a piece missing. How do I get from here to here? There's a missing link. And I believe for the past couple of weeks now, since we heard about Steele Halper, and I've looked at who he's associated with, that there must be some connection there to Christopher Steele. And as we know, Christopher Steele has told us that he got his information as raw intelligence, and that he got it from collectors, and that the collectors got it from intermediaries, who got it from their source, which we'll get to them in a little while. And then, of course, they got it from these Russians. Okay? This is the narrative that we've been told. So for the first time now, we do have a connection, a positive connection, where we can show where Christopher Steele and Steele Halper were at least at the same function that very evening when Steele Halper first began to go to work on Carter Page, the mission being to develop enough of a relationship with Page that he could use that to get to Clovis and then on to Papadopoulos. Okay, so we also know that the week prior to this very event, just 1 week prior, Christopher Steele had passed a memo, which would later become part of the dossier. Passed a memo to the FBI targeting Page as being the guy coordinating a Russian plot. So here we have this function going down. We have Halper is there, Carter Page is there, Christopher Steele is there, and Christopher Steele is there knowing good and well that a week prior he sent information to the FBI targeting Page as possibly being a guy being involved in coordinating some sort of a plot with the Russians. So it's just more evidence, I guess, that to me, and I think that we're eventually going to learn that Mr. Halper was connected to Christopher Steele, may have been one of his primary feeders, one of the primary people feeding him this stuff. He seems to be in the middle of everything, and he seems to be knowing everyone. The only person we hadn't connected him to yet was Christopher Steele. He's connected to all these other people, but now we have a positive connection that shows he probably, and very likely, and I assume this anyway, certainly knew Christopher Steele, but this gives us even more evidence that they were probably in cahoots. So I just wanted to mention that. It's just another little piece of the puzzle that falls into place. Now, we have Clapper going on TV and saying that he didn't know anything about the informant. Of course, remember that, because by the time you hear it, he'll probably have lied about it. He'll change his tune. A couple days, a couple weeks from now, Clapper will come out and say he did know about the informant. But for now, he's out there saying he did not know about the informant. But he didn't just say that he didn't know about the informant. He goes one step farther. He says that Obama didn't know. Well, that's very interesting. We have Clapper saying he didn't know about the informant, and then following up by saying, yeah, and Obama didn't know either. He wouldn't have known either. Well, if Clapper didn't know, then how would he know if? How would he know if Obama knew? If Clapper didn't know, if Obama knew, then he would have to know, because he would have to know what Obama knew. But Clapper saying he doesn't know, but at the same time saying that he knows Obama didn't know? How would Clapper know Obama didn't know? How would he know that? He couldn't have gone up and asked Obama or Brennan or anyone else, hey, does the president know anything about the confidential informant? He couldn't have, because he didn't know to ask, according to him. You see, that's the problem you have when you go out and lie like that, Mr. Clapper. You can't say that there's a topic that you know nothing about and then turn around and say that someone else didn't know about it, that you can vouch for the fact that they didn't know about it. Clapper has no way of knowing whether Obama knew about it or not. How would he know that? He's saying that he didn't even know. He wouldn't know to ask. He wouldn't know to think about it. So how would he know Obama didn't know? He wouldn't have, and he couldn't have. Just another place where he trips himself up. And you would think that that he'd be smart enough, but these guys are just not that smart. I'm come to that conclusion, man. These guys were just not that smart. And the fact that he continues to go on TV and say these things, I mean, this is illogical. You know, he can say he didn't know. Okay, you can say, okay, he's probably lying, but he can say that. But you can't say that, well, I didn't know about it, and I can guarantee you so-and-so else didn't know about it. How would you know that? You wouldn't, and you couldn't. It's just another example. These guys are just beyond liars. I don't know what the word is. Pathological, I don't know. But here's something else that's very interesting that we're learning. 1 week after appointing Mueller, Uncle Bob the executioner, Horowitzstein said that he would recuse himself if necessary if his actions became relevant to the Mueller investigation. Well, you're saying, Horowitzstein, that you would recuse yourself if necessary if your actions became relevant to the investigation? Well, you know, Mr. Horowitzstein, you're already there. You were there when you appointed Mueller. you are already relevant to the investigation. You are the primary witness in an obstruction case, and that appears to be where Uncle Bob's going now. And you also signed off on one of the FISA warrants. So you're already relevant to the investigation, Horowitzstein. Just thought we should bring that up and remind you. And let's not forget that I read to you the letter about a month ago, the letter that Horowitzstein wrote when he appointed Mueller. And if you remember, as I read to you, Horowitzstein basically said to Mueller in this letter, when he brought him in as the special executioner, that he would be brought in to take over the investigation, the operation going on, to basically take over what, you know, he's coming in, he's going to take over the investigation. Well, what investigation would he have been talking about? Well, the only investigation going on that we're aware of at this point was Operation Hurricane Crossfire. That was a counterintelligence operation. So he brought in Uncle Bob to take over a counterintelligence operation, but somehow in the process it morphed itself into a criminal investigation. These are two completely different things. How did he go from a counterintelligence operation that he came in to oversee and take over and morph it into a criminal investigation? Because they're really two completely different things. A criminal investigation is when you suspect that there may be a crime being committed, in which case you launch maybe an inquiry to gather more evidence, to see if there's enough evidence to warrant an investigation. If you do gather enough evidence, then you'll generally go to a judge and say, yeah, we have reason to believe there's some criminal activity going on here. Here's the evidence we have. We would think that we need to launch a formal criminal investigation. And that would, of course, require wiretaps, various other types of surveillance, maybe an informant, something like that. A counterintelligence operation would be if your intelligence people, through their normal routine, discover an adversary with their own intelligence operation working against you, at which point they would go to counterintelligence and say, okay, we've just discovered there's this operation, this intelligence operation going on against us here. We just want to let you know about that. Here's all the facts. We think that it's probably time for a counterintel operation, in which case the counterintel would get involved. They would get into this, try to infiltrate this operation, understand what it's all about, and try to stop it, shut it down. And if they can, in the process of that, find criminal activity, they would then note all that. They would put it into a file, and at some point they would turn it over to the Department of Justice or someone to begin an actual criminal investigation of the counterintelligence operation being run against them, or the intelligence operation being run against them, and you would then launch that type of investigation. So these are important distinctions, and no one has seemed to be able to explain that. It's a very murky. But I wish some people would go back and read that original document like we did here from Horowitzstein, where he says, without any question, he says it very matter-of-factly, that this is essentially what we're bringing you in for, Uncle Bob, is to come in and take over this counterintelligence operation. That's what it was, a counterintelligence operation. But then it morphs itself into a criminal investigation? Come on. There's a lot of problems And somebody needs to go back and really look at this stuff. That whole Mueller thing should be shut down as a result of this. It's an illegal investigation. There was never a prior crime to justify a criminal investigation. Doesn't exist. Nunes can't find it. He thought, okay, well, maybe it didn't come from the FBI. Maybe it came from CIA. Maybe they discovered an operation, and that's how they decided to go for a counterintelligence operation. Still doesn't explain how it can morph itself into a criminal investigation and then go into Manafort's taxes and into all these other things. But put that aside for now. Someone needs to be asking these particular questions because they are relevant and they're important from a legal standpoint and how investigations are run and exactly what you need in order to get all these FISA warrants, to sign all these national security letters, to plant an informant. You really need actually to have a probable cause. You know, they're trying to morph it. On one hand, they're saying, oh, well, this was a criminal investigation when it plays into their hand there. But then when that doesn't work, when they find themselves running afoul of the law, then they flip it and go, oh, well, it was a counterintelligence operation. I mean, it was one of the two. It's either a counterintelligence operation or it's a criminal investigation. It can't be both. And if it's a criminal investigation or if it's a counterintelligence information, there has to be some reason. You know, now in a counterintelligence operation, it would be evidence from your intelligence agency telling you there's something being run against you. In the case of a criminal operation, it would be that they did a probe of some sort, an inquiry, found probable cause, and then went and officially started to launch an investigation. And the warrants that they got for surveillance and things should be in the right time frame. But none of this stuff is. It's not clearly defined where the criminal investigation began and where it ended, if it ever ended, where the counter-intel operation began or ended, if it ever ended. They're overlapping. It's a mess. And it all needs to be sorted out, and it could be sorted out. Starting to frustrate me that this stuff is so obvious, man. Okay, I got that off my chest. Now let's go to the next thing, which is that we learned today that Comey was interviewed yesterday by the FBI. This is in reference to the criminal referral that was sent up by Inspector General Horowitzs, the custodian, the cleanup man, the guy whose job it is to clean up the mess while at the same time trying to preserve the integrity, if they have any left, in the FBI and the DOJ. He's the man in the middle. He's got to clean up the mess. It's like when your kid acts up because you fed him too much sugar, and he acts up in front of some people and embarrasses you, and maybe he damages something, breaks a glass or a flask or a vase because he's playing around acting like a crazy kid. He's wound up on too much sugar or something. He does something, he breaks something, he embarrasses you, and now as the parent, you have to somehow explain and apologize for what happened, explain why that may have happened. You're all embarrassed, and then, of course, you realize you have to discipline the child for what he did. At the same time, you still have the embarrassment, and you have to come up with the explanation. You may have to offer to pay for whatever was damaged or something like that. It puts you in a bad way, and that's where Michael Horowitz is right now. He's got to clean up the mess without destroying and bringing down the whole damn institution. It's kind of a tough job. We'll see how he does. But in the case of McCabe, he did his investigation. He had no problem releasing to the public the smoking gun that he used to come to his conclusion. Michael Horowitz said, here it is, I'm releasing it, public. Here it is. Here's the smoking gun. Here's the interview with McCabe. Here's the lies he told. Plain and simple. And then he sent it up to the, now I first thought that he sent it to the Department of Justice, where he would have Rodenstein making the decision. But I've learned today that's not true. Horowitz did not refer it to the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. to Rod Rodenstein. He referred it to a U.S. attorney in the District of Columbia. Still the Department of Justice, but he didn't refer it to Rodenstein in D.C. It was in D.C., but not directly to Rodenstein or his office there. He referred it to a U.S. attorney that's in D.C. Which one? I don't know. Hopefully it's not Debbie Blabbermouth Wasserman Schultz's brother who's covering up the Seth Rich thing. So anyway, this interview was a result of that criminal referral that Horowitz launched on Andrew McCabe. So they've been doing their investigation since they received the criminal referral, and they've now finally worked themselves up pretty high up the ladder, all the way up to James Comey, and that is who they interviewed yesterday. Now, as we know, McCabe and Comey come into some rather interesting conflict as we move further down this road. And the thing that you have to wonder is, did James Comey in that interview yesterday with the FBI, did he lie to them? Did Comey lie to the FBI yesterday? I'd love to have heard the questions they asked him. I know it's a focus on McCabe, but I would love to know if they ask Comey if he knew about that laptop that we know McCabe and Strzok knew about, that they sat on for 5 weeks and 3 days. I would love to know if they asked Comey if he knew about that, and if he did, when he knew about it. The first clue that we have that Comey knew about it was from Page and Strzok texts, where there is a meeting being held, and Comey asked McCabe, "Why are you sitting on that Wiener laptop?" So I would love to know if they asked him that question and what his answer was, but I'm not so sure that in this interview yesterday that Comey did with the FBI, if he may have incriminated himself in the process. I'm sure he threw Andy under the bus. It'd be my guess. My guess is he threw Andy under the bus. That'd just be my wild guess. But just so you know, the criminal referral that Horowitz sent to this U.S. attorney in the District of Columbia, they've obviously been doing their investigation, because you interview the big guys last, the guys closest to your target last. So that means that would be Comey. So they must be getting pretty close to wrapping up their investigation, and you can bet if they interviewed Comey yesterday that they're probably not more than maybe a couple weeks away from probably finishing their investigation, in which case I'm certain, 100% certain, that McCabe is going to be indicted for at least 4 counts of false misleading statements to the FBI or the Inspector General, and of course his activities and other activities involved. And we haven't even gotten to the email, his association with the email, the surveillance warrants, Operation Hurricane Crossfire. None of that. This is just literally just his own individual actions regarding his false statements and other things that he did. So it's going to get a lot worse for McCabe. There's absolutely no question. This dude's going to be looking at a lot of time. And of course we know what he said, that if they try to pin it on him, he's going to take the whole effing thing, burn the whole effing thing down, take the whole thing down. So that means, in other words, he's going to drop on everybody. And he probably has a lot of dirt on Comey, on Lynch and Yates, maybe Obama himself. We'll find out. Just thought you'd like to know. Now, in response to the story yesterday that we talked about, the bombshell story from Lee Smith, where he tells us that Misfit is alive and well and talking, and he's getting ready. There's a book being written that features a lot about him and Papadopoulos. And he states again for the third time, remember, right after his name came out, that he was the source for Papadopoulos, or a source of the dossier. I think it was when he was the source of the dossier. He was interviewed 2 times in the day after, both by Italian media outlets. And he told both of those Italian media outlets that it was bull, that he was not any source of any dossier, never heard of the dossier, had no idea what in the world they were talking about. It's then, either that day or the next day, that his friend, the Italian government person, contacted him and said, hey, you better lay low for a while. So anyway, that's when he goes into hiding. And then, of course, yesterday we find out that he's been in Italy, probably under protection by the Italian security services, and he is still sticking to it, not only just saying that the dossier, he's no source for the dossier, he doesn't know why he's being used as a source in the dossier, he made none of the claims that are attributed to him in the dossier, denying every bit of that. And he's also denying that he was the one that told Papadopoulos that the Russians had damaging information, let alone emails or anything else, on Hillary Clinton. And so he's denying that as well. Now keep in mind, there's really 2 primary sources for everything that's in the dossier, and Misfits not just attributed as being source B in the dossier, he's also attributed to being the guy who whispered in Papadopoulos' ear that the Russians had the emails or what have you. He denies it all. Now keep in mind, it is Misfit is probably the number one character in the dossier and referred to as the professor, and number two would be Mr. Milian, Sergei Milian. The other two guys, Timoviv and Epstein, were basically very much on the peripheral, and there was really nothing that they contributed to the dossier that was really anything new. It was just kind of building more on what the other two. But Milian and Misfit are the two primaries that are the main sources for most of the real damaging stuff that's alleged in the dossier. And we, of course, have Mr. Misfit denying every bit of it. Not the source. He didn't say, he's saying that he didn't tell Papadopoulos any of that stuff, and he's not a source of the dossier, doesn't know how he got associated with it, or anything else. Now, that creates a problem. That is a problem. Because if Misfit is not the person, if he's telling the truth, and we don't know if he is or not, but if he's not the person that whispered in Papadopoulos' ear, if he didn't tell Papadopoulos that, then who did? And why would Papadopoulos tell the FBI that Misfit was the guy who told him that, unless Pops was lying to the FBI, and I don't know why he would do that. I mean, he certainly heard it from somewhere, we have to assume, because he admits it. It's not like he's saying, I didn't say that. Then we could say, okay, well, Papadopoulos may be telling the truth, and maybe it's Mr. Downer who's lying. Maybe Mr. Downer said Papadopoulos told him that when he really didn't. But that's not the case. Papadopoulos is not denying that he told Downer about this, and he's saying that he got it from Misfit. So somebody is lying. Either Papadopoulos is lying or Misfit is lying. Now, the fact that they charged Papadopoulos with lying tells me that they think he is the one that's lying, and they must believe Misfit, because they interviewed Misfit 2 weeks later, and they didn't arrest him or charge him. They certainly could have. He was right there in Washington, D.C., but they didn't. Which tells me that one of those two guys are lying, and they must believe it was Papadopoulos, which tells us maybe they believe Misfit when he says, I didn't give Papadopoulos that information. So if that's true, this would be a major revelation, because the entire reason they say they launched this operation was because of Misfit telling Papadopoulos about this. Well, if the FBI interviewed Misfit and he says he didn't say that, then you've got a problem with your investigation. You can't go ahead and launch your investigation because the root of your source is denying he said it. So before you can do anything, you got to go find out from Papadopoulos, okay? You said Misfit said that to you. He's denying it. Where did you hear it? Are you sure it was Misfit? And then you got to get Misfit and say, man, Papadopoulos is swearing up and down you told him that. One of you two are lying. You got to figure that out before you go launch into an investigation. And this is not even the source. This is just someone whispering, and allegedly whispering this to Papadopoulos. I mean, you would really want to get to the source, the actual source who told Misfit, but they don't even go that far. They interview Papadopoulos, they interview Misfit, and then they just apparently drop it. It doesn't make any sense. It's a very big question mark that's there. It's a great big hole that they just seem to walk away from and say, okay, well, Pop says he did say it. Misfit says he didn't. I don't know. Fuck it. Let's just go ahead and launch an investigation anyway. Let's just throw it against the wall and see what sticks. You can't do that, man. You can't do that. So this causes a big problem. Somebody is lying. Either Misfit did tell Pops that or he didn't. And of course, Misfit still contends that he is by no way, shape, or form a source of the dossier. This is another reason why Christopher Steele needs to be brought in under oath and asked these questions. But these guys are just floating around out there, and no one's investigating, as far as I know. These would be the first people I would be talking to. Let's move on to the other source that we're told was a reliable source of the dossier. For all those of you out there who run into people and say, oh, the dossier, 90% of it's been proven true. Bullshit. I've been through it. I'm not going to go through the dossier. I've debunked it 3 times already. But let's go to the next source. So the primary source is Misfit, and he is debunking it himself. I'm not the source of the dossier. I was not the guy who told Papadopoulos about Russians having emails or anything else. Okay, so we don't know. Maybe he's telling the truth. Maybe he's lying. Let's go on to Mr. Milian. Milian was identified as source D. Now keep in mind, Mr. Misfit is not a Russian. He's Maltese. And he doesn't work for the Russian government as a spy. The best we can tell, the closest we can come to, is that he is a British spy. Or at least he trains British spies. That's what he was doing at Link University, training British spies. And he says he feels at this time that he was set up. That's got to be very embarrassing for Mr. Misfit, a guy who spent the last God knows how many decades training spies, and he himself gets played by a spy. It's kind of embarrassing to have to admit, is it not? You're a teacher of spies, and you get played by a spy. Quite interesting. Then we get Mr. Milian, source D in the dossier. He's done multiple interviews. He's not hard to find. He lives in New York. He's a U.S. citizen, and he's not a Russian. He's Belarusian. Lives in New York, is a U.S. citizen. He's a real estate investor. He had one deal. He admits he did one deal where he did a marketing campaign on a real estate deal for Donald Trump. That's the extent of it. Never met Trump, never met Cohen, had a few email conversations. He was strictly a Belarusian businessman, a U.S. He's from Belarus, but he's a U.S. citizen, lives in New York. You can go knock on his door, and he'll open the door and talk to you. He's hard to find. He did this interview with somebody who's just got a website. He sat there on a park bench and did a YouTube video. You can sit there and watch it. And basically, he completely 100% denies ever being a source for the dossier, thinks it's a pile of crap. He read it when it came out. He laughed at it and said it's a joke. Same thing Maria Vesselnitskaya did. She looked at it, that's a joke. No one will believe that. None of these people say when you look at it, you will believe it. Just like when I read it, I said, I'm not going to go through it all again. I already did. But keep in mind that he's a Belarusian, not a Russian. He was named as Source D. He is a real estate developer. He's also involved in some other things, but essentially he has no real close connections to Trump, and he admits that in the interview. He's like, I helped him out with a marketing campaign on a real estate project one time. That's my extent of my experience with Trump, and it wasn't even with Trump. It's with his business. He has a lot of things going on. He has a lot of people that do a lot of things underneath him, for him. He probably knows about the big picture stuff, but he's not caught up in the details of the types of things that Mr. Milian was working on in a marketing campaign for a real estate project. So Milian just basically blows all that off and says it's ridiculous and all the rest. He claims that he has never met Christopher Steele. He says that the dossier is just a bunch of lies. Certainly, as far as he's concerned, anything accredited to him, which quite a bit, is all lies. In fact, Milian is actually the guy who supposedly was the source of the PP-Gate story. He just says that's ridiculous, it's crazy. He never said those things. He's never, has no idea about any of it. He says all just crazy. And he says he is not the source of the dossier in any way, shape, or form. Doesn't know Steele, doesn't know anything about it. So here you have the two primary sources of the dossier completely denying everything. So when people say to me, and I say to them, there are no Russians, that's what I'm talking about. If these guys, in fact, were not the sources, and they're telling the truth, then there couldn't have been any Russians, because supposedly they got their information from Russians. But if they say that they didn't ever have or give that information, then there were no Russians. You see, don't let people tell you that there's Russians involved. There are no Russians involved. Steele Halper is as close to a Russian as you're going to get in this particular case. So there you go. Don't let people bully around on comments on YouTube videos. 90% of the dossier has been proven true. Bullshit. Send them a link to my video, to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much. You guys take care. I'll be back tomorrow. Bye.